Hello, my name is Joanna Wolfe, and today I'll be telling you about the Bobcat Pride Scholarship Fund. I'll be going into the history of the organization, its vision, its structure, and the benefits that it provides, and I'll tell you a little bit about my experience volunteering for them as an outreach intern. So the Bobcat Pride Scholarship Fund was founded in 2010 by Texas State alumni, and in the broad strokes, they provide cash benefits to LGBTQ people residing in the San Marcos and Hays County areas. At the time of the organization's inception, 40% of homeless youths in America were identified as being LGBTQ. This is especially concerning considering that a 2012 Gallup poll estimated that only 3.5% of the American population identified as queer, meaning that queer people were far more likely to experience homelessness than the average American. What's more, an estimated 23% of queer people at higher education reported experiencing harassment based specifically on their queer identities. What's worse than this is the general social service landscape for queer people. In Texas specifically, many organizations are faith-based, which leaves them either directly or indirectly closed off to queer people in need. This is a gap in social services that the BPSF has sought to address. The initial program to address this was the Jeremy O. Torres Emergency Stabilization Fund. It provided direct cash assistance to LGBTQ youths in the San Marcos and Hays County area that are experiencing a financial emergency. As well, they wanted to spread general awareness about the nature of systemic oppression against queer people through social media outreach and in-person networking. Since then, the BPSF has also introduced the Victor Saldivar Academic Scholarship, which funds tuition fees for queer people seeking post-secondary education. They've also recently drafted a community needs assessment, which will allow queer people in the community to identify for the BPSF what services they need most, so the organization can decide how they want to branch out as they expand. And this will include possibly mental health support, financial counseling, and so on. All applicants of the BPSF's financial programs must be self-identified as LGBTQ and must reside in the San Marcos and Hays County areas. For the Emergency Stabilization Fund specifically, applicants must be 18 to 25 years old and must be experiencing a financial emergency for which they can provide verifiable documentation. For their academic scholarship, on the other hand, there's not the same age limit, and it applies to any post-secondary education, including community college, four-year university, trade school, cosmetology school, you name it. The Emergency Stabilization Fund currently offers up to $300, though the program has intended to extend that to $500 in the near future, and the academic scholarship offers up to $1,000 for 2 eligible applicants. These programs are funded through a combination of public grants and private donors. As a 501c3 nonprofit, the organization is not directly run by a government agency like you'd expect with Social Security or TANF, and the organization is allowed to run somewhat autonomously. That said, they still must adhere to laws pertaining to their nonprofit status. For instance, they must provide annual fiscal reports to prove tax-exempt status and also to prove their status as a nonprofit agency. And they also have policy pertaining specifically to questions of ethics and conflicts of interest. For instance, nobody working for the organization is allowed to receive their benefits, and applications are reviewed through a double-blind selection process. The BPSF structure is intentionally reflective of its grassroots foundation. Executive Director Heather Aidala described this to me as a non-hierarchical collective governing board. This means that although members of the organization have specific titles pertaining to their areas of focus, they're not limited to these roles, and instead, they're all encouraged to collaborate interdisciplinarily to reach mutual cohesion. So for instance, Ms. Aidala, as the executive director, does oversee all the activities of the other board members and provide suggestions and direction, but neither she nor any other board member has executive authority to usurp the actions of the others. As an outreach intern, I am part of this web, and indeed, I have been welcome to attend the board meetings and encouraged to provide my own input and suggestions. But there are limitations specific to my role that do not apply to the other board members. For instance, I don't have access to the BPSF's email or social media accounts, and I don't have any information regarding financial or operational information that isn't already public. That said, there's still a culture of transparency in the agency that means that the board members have always been happy to give me in-depth information about the inner workings of the organization, and I've never personally felt in the dark about what the organization is doing. Both volunteers and the board members work on an unpaid basis, but interns, which is the role that I inhabited, do receive a stipend to reward them for their work and to help them feel valued by the agency. Although the BPSF structure is sort of circular and insular, as is shown in the diagram, they exist in a much wider web of queer activism and in the local queer community. They pride themselves in collaboration and networking with agencies with similar populations of interest, such as Alliance at Texas State or the Queer Council, and this kind of helps the BPSF circle of influence spread beyond the agency itself. Now, my own personal experience with the agency proved to be very welcoming and supportive. My supervisors were always very interested in my work, and they did as much as they could to give me guidance on the work I had to do. They provided helpful insight, and I got a plenty of knowledge and experience in grant research and community outreach, which were the two areas my volunteer work was focused on. As well, my work with the agency kind of gave me an opportunity to grapple with an interesting divide in the queer communities I'm immersed in and those that the agency is a part of. For instance, my queer friends trend towards more radical politics, more distrust in formal institutions, and an overall cynicism regarding working within the mainstream. And although it is funny for any one queer person to accuse another of being too mainstream, as the mainstream still, especially with the rise of radical conservatism, trends toward bigotry, there's still a noticeable gap between the more socially acceptable queer people who, say, hold public office or shake hands with the president and the current underground community of angsty young radical leftist and anti-capitalist queers that I'm proud to say I'm a part of. This experience caused me to reckon with a lot of that cynicism that as I came to face a lot of the genuinely impactful activism at the core of organizations like the BPSF. Although institutions are always going to have their limits, so too do private GoFundMes shared by a queer person to their Twitter followers, you know? And although I'm still proud of that small scale extra institutional mutual aid that me and my friends engage in, there's an essential place for organizations like the BPSF that are recognized by the federal government and report their finances to the taxman, right? And I think as radical conservatism becomes more mainstream and as the incoming administration is leaning towards all red, it's more vital than ever to toe this line between institutional and extra-institutional work. I think that the BPSF specifically is in a sweet spot between governmental social services and the unofficial mutual aid organized by queer communities. It's an important space to inhabit, and I believe that the BPSF do it with inclusivity and vision and competence. And I've grown more and more charitable, no pun intended, towards the organization and organizations like it. And I hope that in the future, I'll continue to keep in touch with the board members, I can still attend their events, and that I can still do volunteer work with them where possible in helping them reach their very noble and necessary goals. So, I hope you have enjoyed hearing about the BPSF as much as I've enjoyed talking about them and working with them. And I wish y'all a wonderful Christmas break. I thank y'all for a wonderful semester. And where necessary in the coming days, organize.